Hi, I'm Kaitlyn. I'm going to be refuting Anthony's claim on how social media has more negative effects than its intended positive effects. His secondary claims to that were that social media encourages bad behavior, it makes it easy to spread bad publicity, and that social media is a hazard to the public. In response to his first secondary claim that social media encourages bad behavior, my opponent claims that specifically that cyberbullying due to the anonymity of the attacks over the internet are the main cause. He quotes Sam Laird from cyberbullyinghotline.com, who said that 20% of kids cyberbullied think about suicide and 1 in 10 attempt it. This evidence states a statistic on suicide rates among kids that were cyberbullied. This evidence does not support its claim. It states an end result about one reason why the youth commit suicide. My opponent also stresses the anonymity of hiding behind a screen, but bullying typically starts at school in person. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the majority of bullying still takes place at school. 1 in 3 U.S. students say they have been bullied at school. Social media is then an extension of bullying that starts at school, not the cause of it, as bullying has been a problem long before the rise of social media. The second piece of evidence my opponent used was about a case study reported by the Miami Herald, where a teacher was asking for sex from her students over Facebook. Social media in this case was not the root cause of the inappropriate behavior. It was the vehicle for communication. The teacher knew these students personally from the school they attend. It was not a random anonymous soliciting. She sought them out from her physical environment. The bad behavior my opponent claims stems from use of social media is not the cause. The behavior was bad prior to the use of social media. The teacher was already searching for students to harass before contacting them, which she could have done so via other platforms as well, like through email or text messaging. In response to my opponent's secondary claim, social media makes it easy to spread bad publicity. He claims that social media has the power to hurt corporations, quote, with a single viewpoint from a few people, end quote. Yes, one person creates the content that's posted, but engagements and others who view it and agree with it are the reasons that it spreads and trends quickly. Social media perpetuates our country's freedom of speech, and consumers of large corporations want transparency and should be able to voice their opinions freely. In the case he stated about Kendall Jenner and the Pepsi commercial, the Pepsi spokesperson claimed they were trying to promote a, quote, global message of unity, peace, and understanding. Consumers were offended that Pepsi equated sharing a Coke with an officer with a civil rights movement, and those offended use social media to communicate their opinions, which happened to be negative. The hashtag boycott Pepsi is useful, not detrimental, because it allowed people all over to protest virtually. This negates the claim that the viewpoints of a few people are the reason that publicity spreads so fast on social media, because the masses are the ones that spread it. My opponent's next example talks about how social media makes it difficult to get away with anything due to camera phones and internet access being so widely available. And he then quotes a news release where an 80s rapper credited 4 officers for saving his life. Yet he states that police stories on Twitter and Facebook are usually on the topic of police brutality, not bravery. No statistic was given on positive or negative police stories that are posted on social media, just that they are mostly negative. So I question whether or not that's valid. In response to the third secondary claim, social media is a hazard to the public. My opponent's claim was that social media has become a great danger to the public, and that it's the fastest way for people to connect to one another. He implies that the temptation to be on social media at all times is what leads to fatal car accidents. The State Farm study that he quoted said 1/3 of drivers between the ages of 18 and 29 read social media networks while driving. The problem here is not the hazards of social media use, but distracted driving. It's the use of mobile phones while driving that have access to social media on that's leading to car accidents. Talking or texting while driving is just as dangerous as scrolling through Instagram. Overall, many of Anthony's evidence did not support his original claim that social media encourages bad behaviors, spreads bad publicity, and is a hazard to the public. In many of his claims, social media was just a vehicle of communication. Our modern society has modern ways of communication, regardless of the subject matter. Thank you.
Okay, structurally, everything is signposted and labeled pretty well. You had a good summary of the argument at the beginning. I appreciated that. You challenged the relevance of the advocate's statistical data at the beginning, but I didn't really understand the point that you were trying to make with that. The argument about bullying at school, on the other hand, I thought worked a lot more effectively, that the notion that that bullying starts at school and that social media is merely an extension of that kind of bullying, that argument I understood pretty well, and I thought that that was one of the strongest things in your presentation. The same thing with the example of the teacher, the notion that the social media is the cause of this. I think you do have a good point in noting that the teacher did not seek out strangers online, but instead was seeking out specific students that they knew and were familiar with and wanted to be more familiar with, apparently. That they, that this is an indication that that was merely a tool for contacting them. It was not the cause of the teacher approaching them in the first place, and that such contact could have occurred for a variety of reasons or in other contexts. That makes perfect sense. On the second point, you do have this freedom of speech argument that you're making in a couple of spots, and I'm not sure that the advocate would deny that people have a right to freedom of speech, but that doesn't necessarily mean that freedom of speech doesn't sometimes have consequences. So the position that you're taking here is not automatically contradictory to the advocate's point. I do think that you also do a little bit of equivocating, suggesting that the fact that a lot of people shared it means that it was good in some way, that it's that's what the public says and feels, and so that's what we ought to be listening to. I think it might have been a good place here for the advocate to have had an argument saying, that masses are asses and they don't always know what the hell they're talking about. That probably would have made their argument stronger. I think you could point out that, look, when a lot of people exercise their voices, it has a positive effect. And there are lots of ways, maybe the Kendall Jenner ad was not the most important one, but there are plenty of other examples where people have been moved to act or change because of social movements, and the fact that social media facilitates that is not necessarily a bad thing. And a couple of those examples.
I was going to incorporate like the Women's March or something, but like I didn't want to go over or like this like some other.
Yeah, well, there's stuff about Twitter in the Arab Spring and all that kind of stuff too. So there's a lot of stuff out there that suggests that people can, whatever your position on those issues are, people have a need to express themselves, and sometimes they move things effectively, sometimes they aren't ineffective. The fact that they just picked on a Pepsi ad is incidental to the fact that they could be picking on something much more significant. All right. And then the idea that it's a hazard to the public, I think you've got the right argument here, that this is not, they're attributing causality to the tool rather than to the tool who's doing the driving. That's the person that's really responsible for it. And I thought that that was a pretty reasonable position to take.